Welcome to Lantern and Shroud, a podcast of ghost stories, folklore, and the things that haunt the spaces in between. I'm Natalie, and in each episode, I'll guide you through these tales, and my husband Gav will bring each one to life through his artwork, available to watch whilst listening on YouTube. So if you're ready, let me take you somewhere forgotten, a place with history buried in the soil, a story whispered down through time, a haunting that never quite lets go. Some tales are true, some are twisted by the years, and some are still happening. So light the candles, draw the curtains, and listen closely. You've just stepped into Lantern and Shroud. My name's Natalie, and tonight I'd like to take you somewhere quiet, remote, and timeless. A place where the fog rolls in over wild moorland and the silence hides stories older than memory. In this, our first episode of Lantern and Shroud, we journey deep into the heart of Bodmin Moor, a rugged, wind-swept part of Cornwall in the southwest of England. And there, unassuming, stands a building that's seen it all. Smugglers, murderers, lonely travellers, and ghosts. So many ghosts. This is Jamaica Inn. Now, you may or may not have heard of Jamaica Inn before. It's situated high on the windswept spine of Cornwall's Bodmin Moor, where the land rolls in bleak. It's one of England's most storied old inns. Its fame owes much to Daphne du Maurier's 1936 novel Jamaica Inn, a dark tale of smugglers, shipwrecks and murder set a century earlier. But while her story was fiction, the true history of this place is every bit as compelling. The inn was almost certainly purpose-built in the years just after 1776, on a 20-acre plot of empty moorland leased by a retired sea captain named John Broad. Remote and exposed, it was perfectly placed halfway between Launceston and Bodmin, right beside a newly built turnpike road. For weary travellers, whether on horseback, in stagecoaches, or in heavy goods wagons, Jamaica Inn offered warmth, a meal, and a place to rest before tackling the unforgiving miles ahead. Its location soon reshaped travel across Cornwall. Even the Royal Mail began sending its dispatch riders over the shorter Bodmin Moor route, rather than the safer, longer roads to the north. By 1799, Royal Mail coaches were calling at Jamaica Inn daily, carrying letters from across Britain and even from the Americas and Southern Europe. In its prime, the inn stabled 30 horses and employed 3 ostlers to keep the mail and passenger coaches moving. The 1830s brought change. The surrounding moor was slowly enclosed and farmed, and a small community grew around the inn. Homes, a church, and a school forming the hamlet now known as Bolventa. But this new prosperity was short-lived. The coming of the railway shifted trade and travel away from the moor, and in 1851 the last Royal Mail coach departed Jamaica Inn. The years that followed were quieter, the building weathering long seasons of neglect. Revival came in the 20th century with the rise of motor travel. By the 1920s and 30s, the inn was again a busy stop for those braving the moor. Among them, a young Daphne du Maurier. Her novel and later Alfred Hitchcock's film would forever entwine Jamaica Inn with the romance and menace of smuggling lore. Today, it stands as both a thriving hotel and a living relic of Cornwall's past. Its thick stone walls and low timbered ceilings still hold the echoes of the travellers, mailmen, farmers, and if the stories are to be believed, a few who never left at all. The ghosts of Jamaica Inn. Let's start with the setting, because to understand the hauntings, you need to feel the isolation. Bodmin Moor is bleak, beautiful but bleak. Over 80 square miles of open heathland, granite tors and quiet hidden valleys. It's a place where bad weather can roll in without warning and stay for hours, where visibility can drop to nothing in seconds. There are no bright lights here, no busy streets, no shelter unless you know exactly where to look. And at the heart of it all, at nearly 700 feet above sea level, sits Jamaica Inn. This wasn't just a place to rest, this was a hideout. You see, in the 18th and 19th centuries, Cornwall was smuggler country. The coastline is wild, full of secret coves, jagged cliffs, and hidden beaches, perfect for landing contraband under the cover of night. Brandy, gin, rum, tobacco, tea, silk, lace, in fact, anything the crown taxed, the smugglers moved. And Jamaica Inn, it was a halfway house, a resting point for goods, and for the men who moved them. Tired, muddy pack horses would carry barrels and crates up from the coast, through the twisting tracks of the moor, and into the safety of the inn. By day, it looked like any other coaching inn. By night, it became something else entirely. A meeting point for criminals, a place to strike deals, to settle feuds, to hide bodies, or disappear entirely. Picture it. A stormy night in 1795, wind screaming across the heath, rain like needles against the small window panes. Inside the inn, the fire flickers and spits, but the shadows are deep and consuming. In the back room, a group of rough men talk quietly over tankards. The innkeeper's wife glances nervously towards the door. She knows better than to ask questions. And outside, a lone rider waits, soaked and silent, guarding a wagon that cannot be seen. That was the world of Jamaica Inn. And when you mix isolation, desperation, greed and fear, something always lingers. And maybe that's where the hauntings began. Not from any one act of violence or horror, but from a long, steady history of dread. A place where things went unsaid, where crimes went unpunished, where people vanished, because vanish they did. And over the years, as the smugglers faded into history and the world moved on, the rumours started. Strange sightings, footsteps where no one walked, voices in the dead of night. Let's begin with one of the earliest stories, and one that locals still talk about today. They call it the ghost on the wall. It was first seen in 1911, but his story began long before. It's one of those stories that's been passed from mouth to mouth, polished by time, remembered by repetition, but never truly explained. They say a man arrived at Jamaica Inn on a night when the sky was black as coal and the wind howled like a wounded animal. Rain lashed the windows. The moor was impassable and horses refused to move forward on the road. And then the door creaked open. And he walked in, dripping wet, alone. No one recognised him. No coach pulled up outside. No horse tethered at the post. It was as if he had stepped straight out of the mist. He was tall, pale, wearing a long dark overcoat that stayed buttoned all the way up to the neck, despite the roaring fire inside. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face, and when he looked up, his eyes didn't seem to settle on anything or anyone. He didn't offer a name, didn't remove his coat, didn't greet anyone. He walked straight to the bar, sat down, and asked in a low, even voice for a single glass of brandy. Not rum, not beer, brandy. Foreign and expensive. He sipped it once, then let it sit. The young maid behind the bar later said she felt a cold come off him, like winter seeping through a crack in the door. One of the older locals supposedly muttered under his breath, "Bad air on him." But no one challenged the stranger, not in a place like this. Minutes passed and the storm outside built to a frenzy. Wind, screamed through the rafters, somewhere above their heads, and the fire hissed and snapped in its grate. Then suddenly, a name called from outside, from the darkness, a name that nobody else could make out. But the stranger turned his head sharply, stood up, and fled into the night, his drink left at the bar. And just like that, he was gone. He didn't glance back. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't even pay for his drink. Just stepped out into the storm and vanished into the night. He was the talk of the inn the next morning, but there was no word of where he'd come from or where he was going. But later that day, a local found his body, several miles out on the moor, lying face up in the heather. His eyes were open, mouth slightly parted, as though he died mid-sentence. No wounds, no injuries, no blood, just cold. Bone deep cold. The local doctor said it was exposure, but people talked, of course, as people do. They said he looked too still, as if he hadn't died there but been placed there. But that wasn't the end. Because years later, in 1911, people began seeing him again. Sitting on a wall outside the inn, alone. He matched the description of the man who'd become a story of legend, the tall stranger who had fled from Jamaica Inn as quickly as he'd arrived. The apparition would sit, motionless, staring out across the moor, unaware of those around him, those who were curious of his identity. That is, until they attempted to get close to him, make contact with him. That is when he slowly vanished into thin air. Staff would go out to try to speak to him, see if he needed any help, but by the time they reached the wall, he'd already vanished. No footsteps, no sign of where he'd gone. And the strange thing was, it wasn't always at night when he appeared. Sometimes it was dawn, sometimes midday. One guest saw him from their room just before tea, sitting calmly as if waiting for a coach that would never come. Eventually, he came inside. People started hearing footsteps in the hallway late at night, heavy boots pacing back and forth, always stopping near the bar, the exact spot where he once sat. When they checked, no one was there. A barman on 3 separate occasions came downstairs early in the morning to find a stool pulled out slightly, like someone had just stood up and left. Sometimes the brandy bottle had been moved. Once a glass, clean and unused, sat by itself on the polished bar. One guest, a woman in her 60s, said she felt someone sit beside her at the bar. She didn't look at first. She just felt the stool shift, heard the creak of wood, smelled damp wool and earth. And when she did finally turn round, there was no one there. But her arms were cold, so cold she said it felt like frostbite. Another regular claims he spoke to the man. He says he was alone one night enjoying a late drink when someone sat down beside him. He assumed it was the barman and asked if they'd locked the doors for the night. The figure said in a low, tired voice, "I'm not staying." When the man looked up from his glass, the figure disappeared. Today, the ghostly figure is still part of the inn. He's largely quiet, but from time to time a guest will go out for a smoke or glance out their window in the early light. And there he is, sitting calmly, silently, on the wall, looking out over the moor, waiting. For what? Or who? No one knows. But if you see him, don't speak, don't wave, and whatever you do, don't follow him, because some say that's how it started. The first time, when he heard something calling. Not all of the inn spirits are sombre or sinister. Some are far more mischievous. Over the years, guests and staff alike have spoken of a little Victorian girl, a child with long golden curls tumbling over her shoulders, dressed in clothing of the era. She drifts through every part of the inn, as though the walls and locked doors mean nothing to her. One moment she'll be glimpsed in the hallway, her pale dress catching the light, the next she's gone. Those who've heard her say it starts as a faint, breathy sound in the distance, and then the unmistakable trill of a child's giggle. Playful, teasing, but just a little too close for comfort when you know you're alone. And then there's Tommy. No one knows his real name, of course, but over time, the staff have taken to calling him that, as though the familiarity might encourage him to behave. Tommy appears to be around 5 or 6 years old and has been spotted in some of the inn's most unexpected places, standing quietly in the museum, peeking from behind a corner in the ladies' toilets, and most often lingering in the doorway of bedroom 5. He never speaks, but the way he watches is though he's sizing you up for a game only he knows the rules to. People who encounter Tommy often describe a strange pull, the sense that if they were to follow him just for a moment, they might uncover something. But the moment they take a step towards him, he vanishes, and the space where he stood feels inexplicably colder. That's all for our first episode. Thank you for joining me here at the edge of the unknown. If you enjoyed tonight's tale, please consider leaving a comment, maybe share your own spooky tale, and follow us. It helps others find Lantern and Shroud and keeps the lantern burning. Until next time, keep warm, keep watch, and never walk the moor alone.